Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The SPA in Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Terry Oliver, a former police officer of 28 years. He has worked the street, undercover, SWAT, bomb disposal, and was a use of force instructor for decades. 8 years before retirement, I want you to hear that again. 8 years. This is thinking ahead. Before retirement, Terry started a company teaching workplace violence prevention to organizations and individuals, which he runs to this day. Terry is the host and producer of the Courage Wolf podcast, which showcase individuals who have gone past challenges and struggles and now inspire others to do the same. Terry, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Diane, and thanks for that great introduction, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm honored.
My pleasure. I love, first of all, thank you for your service. That is like a whole lifetime, of happening. And a lot of times people don't look beyond police. And so I love just this whole concept of life after policing. What a lot of people don't know is that, people who don't have a passion, they don't have something beyond their retirement, no matter what they're doing, particularly police officers who have a lot of adrenaline that happens in their work. If they just stop life, they have like a less than 2-year lifespan.
Absolutely.
And it's like one of those things that you always have to have something that inspires you, or have something that you do that really has your life continue in a different way. So before we get into where you are now, I want to kind of back up here a little bit and see like where you've been. And one of the things before law enforcement, that you were in graphic arts and photography. So what led you into that, and how did you segue from that to police work?
Well, I love photography, and I thought I was going to be a nature photographer like Ansel Adams or one of the big nature photographers. And I realized that I had absolutely no talent whatsoever in that regard. So I went into the commercial photography field, studied for that for a while, fell into my own business of graphic arts and commercial photography. And then that led me into policing because of a number of different technologies that were coming into place that were going to affect the business. So I thought, now's the time at 31 to get into what I really want to do, which is policing. And I was lucky enough to retire, and with some of the skills that I had and resume, I got on the force within 3 months and had a great career. There was only 1 year when I had a micromanaging supervisor that was not so great, but the entire career was fantastic. And if I can address something that you mentioned about retiring and then 2 years later.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I read the stats on that, and I thought to myself, okay, I can retire with no reduced pension. So I read the stats on that, and you're absolutely correct. If you retire at 57 or 50, if you retire at 65, you have a life expectancy of 67. If you retire at 58, hopefully, cross my fingers, you have a life expectancy of 81. So that factored into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'd like to think too, I think, being in graphics and photography, I don't know if you ever thought about that, but somebody who has a good eye, right? That really helps in police work, to be able to see things that other people don't see. So I always feel like everything that we do in our life, you take all those skills with you to the next thing that you're going to do. And I think as you expand those things, it really adds for a different experience and a way to just expand the things that we learn in life. And, I have to ask, what is your favorite police story?
Oh, okay. A rather lengthy story, but I'll cut it down. I was the sniper on a call one night, and it was a fellow who chased his wife and kids out of the house with a rifle. They ran to the next house. We were called, we were mobilized. I was the sniper on the front of the house. And he kept coming out with the rifle and almost bringing it up to where he was going to shoot into the other house. So I thought to myself, if he does X, I'm going to have to do Y and end the situation. So this went on for about 4 hours. And finally, late in the night, and it was about 100 degrees, he was blaring heavy metal music. And this song came on the radio just as he came out and raised his gun towards the house. And I'm squeezing the trigger. And any ideas what the song might be that was playing in the background?
Bad to the Bone.
Bad to the Bone, that's a good one. But it was it was This Is the End by Jim Morrison and the Doors.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, if I do have to end this situation and take this person's life, I'm going to be a legend in the sniping community at having ended it with that song. But just as he was bringing it up and just as I was squeezing the trigger, he dropped it. He dropped the gun down, went back in the house, and we resolved it peacefully shortly after that. And wow. I'm glad I didn't have to do that, but it was it was just a crazy thing, that song coming on at that time. And right. I've got a million more stories, but we've only got a certain amount of time.
I hear you. It's pretty amazing. And I think, people always hear police situations gone bad, and they don't necessarily get to hear, the type of life and death situations that, we in law enforcement make every day. And yes. I always look at it as it's amazing that more people don't have a fatal outcome, because that really things get pushed so close that it really takes some discernment. It really takes you being present to be able to, bring the adrenaline down, get the critical thinking down, to really be able to make really good decisions in literally like 1 or 2 seconds. So right. Kudos for you for recognizing that.
Thank you. And it takes some next level skills too, which most police officers don't have, because as you well know, we only train once a year.
Yes. Oh boy, this is so true. So speaking of these skills that we develop as a police officer, what are some of the police skills that you have now that you utilize as a civilian?
Intuition, definitely. Intuition, the ability to listen to my intuition, which is what you and I are going to talk about on our podcast together. Yes. Awareness, situational awareness. As you know, most police officers, most, not all, are more aware of their settings, more aware of their scenarios than most civilians. Most civilians go through life, not all, but most civilians go through life with their head buried in their cell phone. And we as police officers and former police officers don't do that, because we know that whatever can happen in a moment's notice. So those are just two of the skills, I would think. And the ability to not take myself too seriously, I guess.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that was one of my skills in policing, is not taking myself too seriously, taking the call seriously, but not myself.
That's a great distinction, because, when you're in intense situations, if you can just be like, okay, I'm the observer here, right? And not get too attached to the outcome, like to really be able to look at, how am I here to serve in the moment? I think that can take you in a lot of different directions. I mean, I'm sure you witnessed, and as well as I did, times where people got in their own way, trying to do their work. And that's always, not a good way to look at things, which leads me to politics of policing.
Are there politics in policing?
Oh my God, right? I love how you've talked about, making a conscious decision early on in your career that you weren't going to necessarily go up the ladder, that you were going to really be the best you can. And, in Canada, it's a constable, right? As well as, in the States, we call it, PO1 or police officer 1, or,
right.
in patrol. And that allowed you to kind of control your future, because there is, the politics can be like, you got one person who doesn't like you on a panel, you're not going anywhere. And, I think that for people to really look at that, and see, what they're going to choose in that. And, did you know when you started law enforcement that you were going to start another business while in it?
No, I didn't. When I left my business, graphic arts company and commercial photography, I left it entirely. And I dove into policing reasonably. And I always knew that what I wanted in policing was a path that you couldn't have if you vied for promotion. So I wanted to be SWAT. I wanted to be a bomb tech. I wanted to be a use of force instructor. This is the path that I chose. And as you just said, there are politics in policing. And if one person doesn't like you, your path will be blocked. And I saw that happen to so many incredible people in policing who were well deserving, but their path was blocked. And so that's why I chose not to vie for promotion and to instead put all my efforts into my own business off the jump. And it worked out very well.
Yeah, so great. One of my favorite things is when somebody was questioning about what it is that you were up to and what you're doing, or somebody else was thinking that maybe you were a slacker on the department, right? That somebody else had pointed out that you were actually making more money than the chief of police with your business.
Yes. And you'll find that all the time in policing. People will have opinions on their opinion of what your career should have looked like. And
Right.
so, and I'm sure you went through that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. And so you really have to choose like how you're going to be, right? And it's like anything, you like, what are you going to do? What's your path? How are you going to follow it? And what that actually looks like. And so for you, talk a little bit about the business that you set the foundation in that you're still doing now around the whole personal protection. Why did you choose that?
Well, I chose it because that was my area of expertise. That was my forte, was personal protection and the control of violence. And so when I started it on a request from a staff sergeant who had a friend who had a company in Toronto. So I trained their staff, and it just kept snowballing from there. They introduced me to another company, and it kept snowballing. And I got into training security companies first, and then I morphed it into training people in the area of workplace violence prevention and workplace violence preparation. And that's turned out very well. And what I do is I train companies who have had violent acts happen or are anticipating violent acts happening. I don't train them in how to report or how to write up a report that you've been attacked. I train them in how to not be attacked in the first place. And if you are and you can't get away safely, I train them with realistic skills to show them how to get out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. And what people don't know about personal protection, what's something that they can have as a just kind of a takeaway skill or an awareness that they can keep themselves more safe?
Well, I think in this day and age, with the advent of mobile devices everywhere in our hands and every other place we can, I think probably the biggest thing for most people is to get your nose out of your phone. Get your nose out of your phone when you're walking down a public street. I think that's the biggest thing, is get your nose out of your phone, look around, and just observe people, observe if their behavior is not congruent with the area in which you're walking or not congruent with the people that are typically in that area, and just have a little bit of situational awareness. I think that's the biggest thing. There was former Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine said in his book, The Way of the SEAL, he said that the biggest lesson that he learned was to be aware. It didn't matter any of the skills that he had, the biggest skill that he had and he developed was to be aware of his surroundings. So I think that's probably the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about it, like anytime anybody has gotten into, if you think for like civilians, that anyone who's gotten into an auto accident, right? Or as traffic division, collision, right? A collision. anytime someone's been in a collision, because it's not an accident, right? Because we weren't paying attention, right? That, you've driven in your car and we're like, well, how did I even get home? Or how did I, take that exit? And, it's interesting how the slightest thing can distract us, right? And I think there's a lot of distraction in the world, which allows us to not be present and not have the awareness. So when we look at what are the things that are distracting us and how we can really shift that, there are actually very little things that people can do that make such a big impact.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that they can do is just switch their awareness level on, go from what Colonel Jeff Cooper calls condition white, which is a total lack of awareness, to condition yellow, which is just observing everything around you, the environment, the people, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, with the podcast how you talked about like feeding the wolf, right? The courage wolf versus the fear wolf, and then we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, people have been just loony about fear. And, there's like a time to have, what I call good fear, where it's like, having that awareness versus, fear that leaves you stuck and paralyzed in a lot of different ways. So can you kind of share a little bit about people who may be just stuck right now in that fear space, and what are some of the things they can do to get beyond that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In regards to the podcast, first, before I answer that question, and if I forget that question, give me a little bit of a push and say, Terry, you forgot to answer that, which happens every once in a while. But I started the podcast when COVID started, and I thought back to that old tale about the two wolves that live inside each of us, the fear wolf and the courage wolf, and the one that gets the most powerful is the one you feed the most. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to call it that. And then surprisingly, when I went to get the domain names, I thought they're going to be gone, and they weren't. They were sitting right there for me. So I snapped them up and started it. And originally I was going to talk with civilians about some of their problems, how they got through them, and what their advice can help the rest of us with, which was one of the things about dealing with fear, putting different people's advice about dealing with problems, adversity, and fear out there. And then I had a conversation with one of the top podcasters in the world, and he said, with your experience, you should be talking to first responders as well. Military, first responders, everything. And so I did. And so I think that the lessons that each of our guests, yourself included a little bit later on, give to us about how to deal with adversity and how to deal with our fears are, I'd say, much more than the lessons that I could share with people. But having said that, I'll try to. I've had my own fears, mostly my fears, to be honest, have come in the area of my health. I've had great health. I have an autoimmune disease, but I'd say most of my fears have come in the area of my health. And I'm learning how to deal with that. I'm learning how to deal with those fears. I know how to deal with it in different areas, in violence, relationships, stuff like that. But I'm still learning how to deal with the fear that arises in all of us whenever we have even something small come up medically. And I'm doing that. I'm doing that by way of breathing exercises, which I've done for decades, meditation, qigong, all sorts of alternative, I don't want to call them therapies, but all sorts of alternative methods for dealing with fear and stress and anxiety. And I consider myself blessed because I haven't had much of it in my life up to this point. Knock on wood, and I just knocked on the wood table.
That's awesome. So good. Well, I think that, how we create our life, and you talk about having like awareness, and when we know all the factors, right, we can make better decisions. We can do things that really support us. And actually, one of the things I always like to ask the guests is that, the environments that we create to live in can really make a difference on us. We live differently in our bedroom versus our office or our kitchen. So what's your favorite room in your home and why?
Well, my favorite room is the studio. And it's because it's where I do my best work in terms of creativity, in terms of creating podcasts and questions. But having researched you, it's also the room that I realize needs the most attention. I need to declutter and put things away so that I can be more creative and tap into my best self, I guess. But yeah, the room in my house that I love the most is this room here. Very small, but it's where I seem to be able to do what I need to do. Did that
Yeah,
answer your question?
absolutely. I think that people don't realize that anywhere we go, they're like, there's an energy, right? And I think you really kind of hone this as a police officer, right? When you walk into a place and you're like, something doesn't feel right? Something's
Mm-hmm.
off. And so when we listen to that, that's kind of the intuition that we were talking about. I think if
Yes.
we really look at that in like our personal space, I think sometimes people don't realize, and usually when I was like personally going into people's homes and really helping them really create the environment that works for them, was like, is there any room or anything in your space that you like, a room you don't like, or
Mm-hmm.
certain things in your space you don't like? And I think that, there's reasons behind those things. And so when you know what those are, you can clear that allows you to have the bandwidth to think more clearly. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, that being said, I think that there's something now with whole kind of this past lockdown that's happened in the world. Mental health has taken a hit on
Oh yeah.
just so many different ways. I mean, suicide has been up, children being in fear. I mean, there's just so many things around that. Can you kind of speak to the whole thing around just like mental health and having some mental health strategies to just get beyond hard things?
Absolutely. When I created this podcast, I almost didn't do it because our first guest was triggered by his conversation, and he said, "I can't do this." And so I said to my partner, "Am I going to be triggering everybody that I have a conversation with?" And she said, "No, the people you have a conversation with, their stories are healing for them as well." And so that's one of the reasons for the podcast is the people who are on heal by way of telling their stories. The people who listen also heal in terms of mental health challenges by listening to those stories too. In terms of my own mental health, I've been really blessed in a 28-year career. I've seen horrific things, as I'm sure you've had, but because I put systems in place and I put skills in place well beforehand that I used consistently, that I wasn't really touched by the ramifications of post-traumatic stress or occupational stress injuries. And so some of those I've already mentioned, but some of those are breathing, simple breathing, what can be called box breathing, combat breathing, tactical breathing, stuff like that, among other breathing forms like the Wim Hof method, meditation, sitting in nature, walking in nature, just getting out of even this environment. Getting out of this environment and walking in nature to enhance your creativity and lower your stress. And so those are just a few of the things. And I touched on one of them beforehand, was not taking myself too seriously within whatever role that I had, whether it was police officer, whether it was business owner, whether it was a podcast host or anything like that. So those are just a few of the things. And did that answer your question well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to know, how does humor come into play for you?
Oh, it comes into play a lot. Tongue-in-cheek humor, sometimes dark or gallows humor. Sometimes, although in this day and age you can't use that in a lot of situations. But yeah, just tongue-in-cheek humor, wit, and smiling a lot too. Just smiling. And don't get me wrong. I don't go down the downtown streets in Hamilton just smiling away. A lot of people do that, who we know, but just smiling and humor. Absolutely humor. Having the ability to see the lightness in situations, even in dark situations.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and speaking of lightness, you've often referred to Ram Dass about we are all walking each other home. Talk a little bit about what that means to you and how you utilize it in your life.
Well, I've been, I guess, a student of Ram Dass inconsistently over the years. And when my partner and I got together, she's 21 years younger than me, but she's 22 years more wise than me. And so,
good distinction, my man.
yeah. And so, yeah, in what I talked about before, my worries about medical issues that for the most part have never materialized. She's talked to me. She said, we're all just walking each other home. And that's what we have to do. We have to provide comfort for each other as we're walking each other through life towards that final destination. And so that's what that particular quote means to me. We are all, you, I, your audience, my audience. We're all just here to help each other in some way, manner, shape, or form. And we're all just walking each other home at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think that, as especially over the last couple of years, when people are isolated and they kind of like are alone with their own thoughts, depending on, and just as in line with the Courage Wolf, it's like, which wolf are you going to listen to? Which one are you going to feed? And where are you at with that? And I think when you have that awareness and you're able to actually really look at, okay, what am I feeding in my life? Like, what am I doing? And, fear is a very, slippery slope. Right? You can utilize it to move forward in it, or you can be mired in it and be stuck and not see the bigger picture. So, I think that it really makes a difference when you're able to look at that. And so when you have people in your life that can really kind of see beyond you or see, what's in that, who are some of the people in your space and what have they done to help you get out of challenging situations?
Oh, that's a tough question, Diane. It's a very tough question. My partner, Kristen, my kids, with some of their issues, as all of our children have. You look at some of their issues and you realize that, maybe yours aren't that big. Pets, my pets as well. They're very supportive, and I'm really surprised that none of them have decided to visit us in the studio space today. I would say a couple of friends who have been very helpful were two friends that I worked with. One was Rob Nelson. He's since moved up north, and he and I worked together on a shift. And the other is Diego Meja, and he and I worked together on a shift too. So very supportive. No ego involved in any of our conversations. It's just that what you brought up a second ago. It's just that, hey, we're all walking each other home, so let's help each other through whatever we're going through. So I would say those people.
Nice. I love that. One of the things that is so unique about you is having the longevity of a career in the police department and a successful business with that. How was your transition from police work into private sector?
Oh, a piece of cake. Absolutely a piece of cake, because I came on when I was 31. And so I had some experience, and I wasn't the type of person all through my career where I was stuck in my career. I had other interests. I always had other interests. And I got to see the people within the department who had no other interests and how that affected them. And so that was some good advice, I guess, in terms of seeing how I didn't want to be. But I always had a lot of interest. And so my transition into the private sector, my transition into private life was a piece of cake. My second last year in the department, we accumulate sick days. So my second last year in the department, I took a third of the year off and burned some sick days. No problems whatsoever from the department. And my last year, I took 2/3 of the year off and burned sick days. And again, no problem. But I was of the realization that I knew as soon as I walked out the door, no matter how big a career I thought I had, as soon as I walked out the door, 2 weeks later, a month later, there were going to be people who didn't remember me. And that was okay with me. That was fine, because I had other interests. Some people that you and I have worked with don't have those other interests. And so they have a more difficult transition from policing, where that's all they are, to the private or to retirement, where they're still a police officer, but they don't get a chance to do what they once did that validated their identity.
Right. Right. That is such a great perspective to be able to look at, because I think no matter what it is, I mean, we hear, empty nest syndrome, right? With parents who, once their children leave, it's like they have no life because their whole life was around their children. And so, whether it's your career or someone else, it's like, I think having something else to look forward to, right? You want to
Oh
have
yeah.
something to look forward to, really, I think makes the difference. We talked about with mental health, right? And how we look at things. How you look at things can really make a difference on the experience that we're having in life.
Yes. And Elvis has some great advice. Has something to do, has something to look forward to, have someone to love.
Love it. So good.
Yeah.
I love it. Love it. So I know that our listeners are going to want to stay in contact with you, Terry. How can they best do that?
Two different ways. By email, Terry Oliver at Rogers.com or Terry at thecouragewolf.com. They can listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, all those platforms, or they can go to thecouragewolf.com and listen there. All the episodes are listed there. I also have, if they're interested in any workplace violence preparation programs, it's conflictmanagementassociates.com. And yeah, if you're interested in any of that or continuing any conversation, just get in touch with me and we'll make some space to do it.
Perfect.
And thank you for the opportunity to tell your listeners about that.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And, as you know, our theme for this season is how people are choosing freedom. So in what way are you choosing freedom in your life today?
Getting back into shape, getting all systems go, physical, nutrition, and physical, nutrition, and relaxation too. So I'm putting all three of those systems together this year in order to free myself for more creativity, to do more work, I guess, to see who we can help over the long run.
Love it. So great. I love that, you talked about, having some fears in the area of health, and now you're being very proactive in it and actually, having a plan around it. So I think this is a really important thing for our listeners to hear, is that, anything that you're stuck in, any fears that you may be having, there are solutions and you are at choice. You can change that at any time. Whatever your circumstances are, you can make those changes. So thank you, Terry, for that awareness.
Right. And it's never too late to start.
Absolutely. And with that, with our listeners, I just want to thank you for being here. Without you, we're talking to ourselves. And it's so important to, share this, right? Get this out in the world, that, I think it's important for people to know that they may feel stuck in their life and that you can have many iterations and many ways to reinvent yourself, way to look at life. It is something where you can be at choice with that. So, please share, get the word out. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, Diane.
My pleasure. See you, Terry.